Put that up there. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the second quarter. You've made it. You're a fourth of the way through this fun ride of a year. Okay. We're going to be changing things up here in this class topically. We're done with our logic unit. We're moving to the SAT geometry. All of the core geometry facts you need for the SAT. It's actually a fairly short list. So we'll be hitting it hard and fast, just very straightforward. Here's the formula. Practice using it. Go, go, go. Okay? So it's going to be fast-paced and much more straightforward. Probably feel a lot like what you're used to experiencing in a math class, more so. Okay? And before we do that, I'm going to talk today and tomorrow about the SAT test itself in the veins of sort of know thy enemy, right? The more you know about the test in general and test-taking tips and strategies you can use, the more that actual specific information will be useful for you when you go to take it. And rolling back one more before we start that for today, let me just address some of the questions I'm sure you have. What happened with that test from last week? The question section is all graded, and that was put in your grade. The essay section is not finished grading. So that'll happen later this week. Because I still have, not everyone has taken the questions portion, I cannot release back to you the questions so you see specifically what you got wrong. That is coming as soon as the last student has taken it. And then I will have more details for you probably by tomorrow on doing any sort of corrections or retakes to regain some of those lost points. Okay? That's all the details I have for you right now. I know it's not a lot. Bear with me. It's coming. Okay. So before we dive right in, because I actually had to share this information not just with the geometry classes, but with the Algebra 2, and one of the classes is with another teacher, I went ahead and I pre-recorded the whole thing. So today we're just going to watch a video of yesterday's version of me, and then you have a Google Doc there posted on Classroom. Open that up. There's 10 questions for you to answer as we go along, and you can just type those in as you hear, or even some of them you'll be able to read them right off my screen there. Okay? Then let's get started. And I need to tell Zoom to share this guy so it collects the audio.
Today, sophomore students, today I want to talk to you about the most important test you're going to take in your high school career, the SAT. Now, my students have read an introduction to the SAT taken from the book Up Your Score, the Underground Guide to the SAT. It is the #1 book I do recommend all students read extensively in preparing for this test, and you'll have gotten a few of these details. But some things I would like to highlight for you today that, in my opinion, you need to know before you tackle this inevitable challenge. And before I even get to that, let me just say a few things about where I'm coming from and why I think this is such a big deal. Your goal at this school is to get into college and do well at said college program. In order to get into said college, it is still the general policy across the nation to consider your standardized test score. Doesn't mean it's all of your application or even the most important part, but it is still a large piece of it, and it can say a lot about you and your study habits. Is that accurate? In my opinion, not really. Honestly, I would define the SAT as a test to measure your ability to take the SAT and nothing more. But the colleges will consider this score somewhat important. They seem to be under the delusion, if you will, that it measures your ability to think and process and your general knowledge of basic high school curriculum and all of that wrapped up into a single number, which would be really convenient if true. And the reason I make such a big deal about this is because I'm good at taking tests. I always have been. That's been a personal skill of mine, and so I've done rather well. I did not, in full disclosure, take the actual SAT. I took the ACT instead, which they used to be significantly different. Nowadays, they're pretty close to the same thing, but I did rather well. If you know anything about the ACT, you'll know its scoring system goes from 0 to 36, 36 being the absolute best score possible. I got a 34. So I know a little bit of something about taking standardized tests. Don't say that to brag. I just say that so that you know I know what I'm talking about. Now, you're going to have to sit through the SAT junior year, typically spring of junior year is when you definitely have to take it. This year, our seniors, due to current events, had it pushed back till fall of their senior year, and they just got finished with that ordeal. The test itself is at minimum 3 hours and 50 minutes of testing time, plus a few 5-10 minute breaks here and there. So you should expect to block out at least 4.5 hours of your day for this thing, not including transportation. It's a big deal. It's a big process, okay? And the more you know about it, and the more prepared you are for it, the better you'll do, the better your transcript will look, because you'll have this nice big shiny test score on it. And I don't mean to belabor a point, but let's be honest here. There are other demographics across the country that have a significant advantage in this field. You may not have this advantage, and I want to rectify that. I want you to attack this test and be able to assert your dominance at your school of choice with a phenomenal SAT score. That's my goal for you. And if that is your goal as well, please follow along. A question sheet has been provided. This is being presented to you in recorded video format and will be available at a later time. And if you need to pause and scrub back through to find your answers to those questions, you can be free to do so. Let's go on. The SAT is divided into 4 sections, 2 of which are English related. They are not my specialty. 2 of which are math related. I'll be able to go into those a little more detail, so just understand my bias there. First off, you have the reading section, 65 minutes long to answer 52 questions. Do the math on how long that is you have to spend per question. And then keep in mind, this is the reading section. You will have to read several large passages and then answer multiple questions about said passage. So your actual time spent thinking per question is greatly diminished. After that, you have the writing section, which is 35 minutes long and has you answering 44 questions. And I'll get a little more into specifically what's the difference between these two in a few minutes. Next up, you have the math section, which is in total 80 minutes long, and you will be answering 58 questions. The math section is actually divided into 2 subsections, one where you are allowed a calculator and one where you are not allowed use of a calculator. And then finally, there is the essay portion. They say it's technically optional. It's not optional. If you actually want to present yourself well, you will take the essay, and if you are taking the test here at school, you'll be writing the essay. That's another 50 minutes. In order to do well on this, I would break the SAT skill set down into 3 main categories. And that would be your content knowledge, your test taking strategies, and then your specific SAT practices. Okay? The difference between the last two being one is generically applicable, and you could apply these techniques to any test you take in school. Whereas there are certain quirks that are unique to the SAT itself. Some carry over from the ACT, so it's more of a standardized test trick and not as applicable to your classroom environment, but still worth knowing here. So let's talk about that content part first. The first section of the SAT is the reading section. They call it the evidence and analysis, in which you are reading a passage. You're going to look for evidence to answer the question, oh, why did the character do this action? You read the passage, oh, it says because he thought this. And you will use that information to answer the questions. So you are looking for evidence that supports your analytical answers. The questions are going to be very similar to the types of things you do in English class, where you read a book and you analyze it for character and plot and themes and all of that good stuff. The next section is the writing portion, and this is the other side of the communication aspect. Instead of looking to understand what somebody else is communicating, this is how well are you at communicating your ideas, except you're still communicating the SAT's ideas. This is where all of the grammar portion is going to be included, some vocabulary to an extent, although the vocabulary has changed drastically. In the past, the SAT was famous for its unique vocabulary of fancy-sounding words that nobody ever used, even in a college setting, so they've scrapped that. As well as an information section where you'll have pieces, possibly short reading segments, from science and history backgrounds, so not just a pure literature standpoint, but in actual communications. How can this information be conveyed? Is it being conveyed well, properly? What information is trying to be conveyed in this graph? Maybe not a graph, that'd be found more in the math section, but short passage or piece of information. Okay, all of that will be found in that section. And then you have the math portion. And the math portion, I can speak in a little bit more detail here. You're going to have, first and foremost, algebra. All of your basic algebra skills. Algebra 1, for sure, all of that is on there. Anything that you can do in an Algebra 1 class can be found on the SAT. Basic level Algebra 2 content can be found there. Some of the real in-depth, juicy bits probably don't make the cut. Another area they call the problem solving and data analysis type questions is similar to the writing portion, where they might give you a graph, in this case more of a bar chart or a line graph, and ask you to interpret what's going on here, as well as the problem solving aspect, where they will set things up more obscurely. It will not be a simple, hey, solve this equation. This is the word problem section, right? And then another category of math question they call advanced math, and this is where you'll find more of the Algebra 2 level, dealing with beyond linear and parabolic functions. So you might find a higher order polynomial, something about an exponential, maybe a trig identity or two could be lumped into this category. And then finally, the official SAT material slaps on an additional math topics section, and this is where everything else not previously listed falls. And that includes all of geometry, it makes me sad, and a little bit of trigonometry can be found here, which, if you've been watching, this is at the very most 1/4 of the math questions. Proportionally, it's not that large. Maybe a 1/6 of it can fall into additional topics, and then half that is devoted to geometry, half that is devoted to trig. So if you find one of those areas is your weak point, good news, there's not going to be that many questions about it on the SAT. All right, moving on, I'm going to talk very generally here on strategies because tomorrow I would like to spend more time talking about much more specific types of strategies you can use for the SAT and test taking in general. But real shortly here, one thing you need to keep in mind is preparing your mind and your body of which is there to support said mind in its endeavors. So it is important that you set a proper work schedule, get used to being up and working around the time that you will be taking the test, get a good night's sleep, eat a good breakfast, that kind of thing. Take care of yourself and start building those healthy habits soon. If you try to get up super early for the day of the test and you've never gotten up early that whole month, your brain is going to fight you the whole way. You have to start sooner for these kinds of things. Second, I would like to talk about some kind of focus tricks. The SAT is a long, arduous process, and you need to be able to survive until the end because the last question on the test is just as important as the first question. So you need to be ready for it, which means you need to keep your mind sharp while taking the test. And so there's some tricks you can use to keep yourself in a good, healthy thinking mood and interpret things as best as you can. And then finally, probably the most important type of test-taking strategy would be efficient time usage. And I know this is a great challenge for many of you, managing your time, especially on tests. There are tricks of the trade, and I'd be happy to teach them to you, but you have to be willing to accept them. And they're not going to be easy at first. Like all of this, it's going to require practice, okay? But because it's a timed test, unlike, say, the MAP test, you have to limit yourself. At a certain point, you have to be able to ask yourself, am I really going to get this question right, or is it time to move on? Maybe you can come back to it later. Maybe not. You got to cut your losses and move on. And that's the type of decision making you have to be able to perform in addition to answering the actual test questions themselves. And then finally, the most important SAT taking skill you can possess is knowing and practicing the SAT itself. And I'm going to give you 3 good reasons why this is so critical. The questions are there to trick you. It is not a friendly test. In fact, if you read that introduction, you will know that SAT actually stands for the slimy and atrocious torture. It's not fun, but it can be beaten. The questions are there to trick you. They are unlike most questions you will usually encounter in the classroom. The answers are even worse. The answers are designed to trap you. They will find the most common mistakes made while answering said question and put them on the answer sheet. Right? Every time that you forgot to divide by 2 at the end, you forgot to switch the signs, they have that possibility as one of the options. So when you look at your answer sheet and go, oh, I got an answer, it's there on the sheet, it must be correct. You cannot count on that. They're designed to trap you. And the only way to overcome this and recognize these tricks and these traps is to practice, to expose yourself again and again to actual SAT questions so that you get used to their structure. You understand how they work, how they think, and you can outthink them. In addition to practicing the questions, it is important to practice the test itself. There is absolutely nothing on the planet quite like sitting in a room at a desk with nothing but you, your pencil, your eraser, and a standardized test with a time limit. The pressure will get to you. the time ticking away at every precious second that you waste twiddling your thumb, sharpening your pencil, erasing a stray mark in your workbook. Absolute nightmare. You have to practice the actual time pressure so that your body and your mind will be used to it. The time pressure is real, and it is a key component of the standardized test. They think by giving everybody the exact same amount of time that that's called being fair. Not at all. But it's something we can overcome. All right. That's going to cover all of the main ideas I have for you today. Again, tomorrow's video will cover some of those test-taking strategies in more depth. Please answer and submit your questions that go along with this video. And if you have any additional questions back for me, feel free to let me know either by email or in comment on this video below. You know how that works. So long, farewell, enjoy the rest of your day.
All right, does anybody have any questions? No?